Claire adjusted her window shade for the third time in as many minutes, squinting at the sliver of sunlight creeping over the tarmac. Seat 22C was snug, but familiar. A middle-of-the-plane perch she had always favored for her flights close enough to the aisle for comfort, far enough from the engines for quiet. She had chosen this seat with meticulous precision, not realizing it would soon become infamous. Her small backpack sat at her feet, slightly bulging with notebooks, a worn guidebook, and her trusty camera. She tugged at the straps nervously, feeling the slight weight of her belongings press against her legs. Claire had been planning this trip for months, each detail carefully mapped. Washington, D.C. had always been a city that fascinated her not just for the monuments, museums, or the history, but for the stories that seemed woven into every street. From the Lincoln Memorial's solemn grandeur to the hushed whispers of archives in the National Museum of American History, Claire imagined herself wandering through the past, notebooks in hand, recording impressions for a personal journal she hoped to one day publish. She hummed softly, a nervous tune she had learned as a child, as she scanned the cabin. Around her, the cabin was bustling with the usual pre-flight energy. Flight attendants moved briskly, checking seatbelts and overhead bins. Passengers shuffled in, dragging carry-ons and murmuring greetings. And somewhere toward the front, a man was loudly explaining his carry-on dilemma to anyone within earshot. Claire noticed it all, as she always did, documenting the mundane, the little moments most people ignored. The overhead bins clicked shut in a series of rhythmic thuds. The intercom buzzed, and somewhere behind her, the engines rumbled, impatient and eager to take flight. She pulled her travel journal from her backpack, its leather cover soft from years of use, and flipped to a fresh page. She always began each journey with a ritual, a list of observations, expectations, and secret hopes. Today's list was simple. She would visit the Smithsonian, wander the National Mall, and perhaps catch a glimpse of the president's motorcade, if she were lucky. She scribbled in neat cursive, careful not to smudge the ink as the flight attendants began their safety demonstration. The motions were automatic, rehearsed a choreography of calm that almost lulled passengers into a false sense of security. Claire's gaze drifted to the cockpit door. She knew it was impossible to see much beyond it, but she liked to imagine the pilots as silent guardians, orchestrating the hum of machinery and human anxiety with quiet competence. Today, their voices came over the intercom in casual tones, reassuring yet distant. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be departing shortly. Flight time to Washington is approximately 1 hour and 15 minutes. She nodded politely to the voice, a faint smile tugging at her lips, and returned to her list. The plane's engines rumbled louder, vibrations moving through the floor and into her bones, and she felt the familiar thrill that accompanied takeoff. She had flown dozens of times, yet each departure carried the same strange combination of fear and excitement. A twinge of anxiety crept into her chest, one she always tried to ignore. Today, it felt different, but she chalked it up to early morning. Nerves. She had her notebook, her headphones, and a window view. Surely, nothing could go wrong. Claire looked around at her fellow passengers. A young couple across the aisle whispered to each other, heads leaning together, completely absorbed in their own world. 2 elderly women shuffled down the aisle, their eyes bright with anticipation, clutching tickets and purses. A man in a dark suit tapped at a tablet, muttering numbers under his breath. Ordinary people, ordinary moments, ordinary lives, converging in a metal tube suspended thousands of feet above the ground. Claire smiled faintly, taking mental notes. She always found beauty in the mundane. Then, almost imperceptibly, she noticed something strange. A flicker on the overhead display, a quick blink that vanished before she could fully comprehend it. She frowned, glancing at the flight attendants. They seemed normal, moving with practiced efficiency, but a subtle tension in their shoulders caught her attention. Something had changed, though she couldn't place what. She shook her head and returned to her notebook, telling herself she was being paranoid. Perhaps it was nothing more than early morning fatigue, or the nervous excitement that came with travel. Claire's eyes wandered back to the cockpit door. She caught a flash of movement, a subtle shift in posture, a brief glance exchanged between the pilots. Nothing alarming, really, but something about the way they had communicated, silent and swift, tugged at her instincts. Her curiosity piqued. She jotted a note. Pilots seem unusually focused this morning. A small detail, probably meaningless, but it lodged itself in her mind like an itch she couldn't scratch. The seatbelt sign clicked off, and passengers began settling in for the short journey. Claire tucked her notebook on her lap and reached for her phone. She intended to check messages, perhaps send a quick note to her family about her departure. Her thumb hovered over the screen, and then, without thinking, she opened an email that she assumed was safe. It was a newsletter, she thought, but one line caught her eye. Something strange, a string of numbers and letters she didn't recognize. Curious, she clicked. A screen flickered momentarily. Claire frowned. The text seemed nonsensical, but it held an odd rhythm, almost like a code. She squinted, leaning closer, trying to make sense of it. Her heart rate quickened slightly, but she brushed it off. Maybe it was a spam email, or some glitch in her phone. She tapped away, scrolling past it, returning to her journal. She wrote about the twinge of unease, describing it in detail. She called it the subtle thrill of potential discovery, unaware that her curiosity had unknowingly triggered a chain of events that would transform her flight into an extraordinary incident. The engines roared to life as the plane taxied to the runway. Claire pressed her notebook against her chest, watching the city fade beneath her. The thrill of liftoff surged through her once again, stronger this time, and she smiled despite herself. The hum of machinery, the vibration of the floor, the gentle sway of the cabin, it all felt comforting, almost like an embrace. Passengers adjusted themselves, some closing eyes, some staring eagerly at the ground falling away. Claire closed hers, savoring the sensation of being suspended between earth and sky. Then, a flicker on the cockpit display caught her eye. It was subtle, easily missed by anyone not paying attention, but something about it made Claire glance up. The pilot's movements grew slightly more deliberate. She didn't know why, and the rational part of her mind told her to ignore it, but curiosity had always been her guiding force. She pulled her notebook back onto her lap and scribbled, "Something feels different." She didn't know what it meant, but the intuition hummed inside her, a low warning she couldn't shake. For the next few minutes, the flight settled into a rhythm. Claire wrote, passengers slept or scrolled on devices, and flight attendants performed their quiet duties. She allowed herself a small measure of calm, breathing deeply. But the sensation of being watched, or perhaps the weight of an unseen presence remained. She shook her head again, smiling faintly, telling herself she was letting imagination run wild. After all, she was just a tourist. Just a girl in 22C, traveling to see the sights of Washington, D.C. Unbeknownst to Claire, a subtle signal had been triggered the moment she clicked the strange email. A digital quirk, a coincidence, but in the eyes of a complex security apparatus, it was enough to elevate the situation. Somewhere, in offices far above the city and beyond the clouds, officials noticed a match between a routine passenger and an active protocol. Fighter jets were alerted. Air Force One security systems registered an anomaly. Claire remained blissfully unaware, humming to herself, jotting notes in her journal, and imagining a simple, ordinary flight that was about to become anything but ordinary. And as the plane climbed higher, the clouds stretching endlessly beneath. Claire closed her eyes, not knowing that the next hour would change everything she thought she understood about ordinary life. Curiosity, and the power of a single, seemingly insignificant choice. Claire's eyes fluttered open as the cabin seemed to shift ever so slightly. Something in the air had changed, though she couldn't yet pinpoint it. Flight attendants were moving with unusual precision, glancing repeatedly at the cockpit, murmuring softly into their headsets. Their normally calm expressions were now tinged with subtle concern. Claire tilted her head, squinting, trying to make sense of the barely perceptible tension that seemed to ripple through the cabin like a hidden current. The hum of engines no longer felt comforting. It was almost insistent, like a quiet reminder that something was out of the ordinary. Her phone buzzed sharply against her notebook. Claire jumped, fingers fumbling as she opened it. Messages, alerts, and notifications flooded her screen. Some were mundane: a text from her mom, a boarding confirmation for a connecting flight, but others were unfamiliar, almost alarming. A banking alert blinked red, warning of an international transfer she had never made. Her email inbox contained a message flagged as sensitive, one she certainly hadn't opened before. She tapped at it cautiously, curiosity prickling at the back of her neck, and the screen flickered. Lines of code, unintelligible and strange, danced across the display. Claire swallowed hard, trying to shake off the creeping unease. She was a tourist. This was her first time in D.C., not someone embroiled in international finance or government secrets. Yet the alerts insisted otherwise, as though her presence alone had triggered something far beyond her understanding. She glanced around, noticing for the first time that passengers were looking out the windows with more than casual interest. Some were craning their necks at a faint glint in the sky. Jets, military jets, she realized, suddenly streaked past in formation, wings slicing through clouds with precise coordination. Her heart began to pound. She pressed her phone against her chest, trying to steady her breath. "It's nothing," she whispered to herself, though the words felt hollow. Something significant was happening, though she had no idea what. She tilted her head, trying to peer at the cockpit door. One of the pilots appeared briefly, a calm but serious expression etched into his features. A flicker of conversation through. The intercom followed a few clipped sentences she couldn't fully comprehend, but they carried a weight she had never heard before in casual flight announcements. Then the intercom came alive with a voice that sounded oddly formal. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. For reasons outside our control, our flight is under an escort." The words were calm, professional, but something in Claire's chest tightened. She blinked, unsure she had heard correctly. Escort? Her mind raced, associating the word with police convoys, protective services, or impossibly military operations. The hum of engines felt deafening now, like it carried the weight of an entire sky around her. Claire looked out her window, and her breath caught. The jets were unmistakable, now sleek, gray, with sharp edges glinting in the sunlight. They maintained formation with almost obsessive precision, flanking the plane on both sides. She could see the pilot's hands on the controls, heads turned in coordination, fingers tapping buttons, issuing commands Claire could not understand. The small, ordinary aircraft she had boarded with no thought beyond sightseeing was now ensconced in a high-stakes aerial operation she could barely imagine. The flight attendant nearest her leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "Ma'am, it's best if you stay calm and seated. Everything is under control." Claire nodded, though panic bubbled under her calm exterior. She tried to focus on her notebook, scribbling frantic observations. Jets, cockpit alert, red flags on phone, escort. Something triggered. Each line felt inadequate to capture the strangeness of what was happening. She had always been a careful observer, but now Every instinct she had honed seemed insufficient to decode this reality. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The formation held steady. Communications crackled over the radio, fragments she could not fully hear, voices clipped and coded, more like signals than human speech. She realized the plane was no longer on a standard flight path. Air traffic was being rerouted, other aircraft diverted, the entire sky around them becoming a carefully managed airspace. Every glance out the window reinforced the surrealness. Fighter jets, invisible signals, the faint outline of Air Force One high above, an imposing presence she could only catch in glimpses. Her phone buzzed again. Another alert, another line of text she could not decipher. Claire's hands shook slightly as she scrolled, trying to make sense of it. The intelligence of her devices, somehow, seemed intertwined with the military operation, unfolding outside. She had clicked on a message earlier innocently, but the consequences were cascading like dominoes. In her mind, a slow realization settled. She was no longer just a tourist. Something about her presence, her actions, her SEAT-22 had made her central to a sequence of events no ordinary person should ever encounter. She caught a faint whisper of conversation from a nearby passenger. "Is this normal?" a man asked, voice low, almost scared. Claire shook her head subtly. "I don't think anyone knows," she murmured. She felt a thrill of fear mixed with disbelief. Her journal suddenly felt inadequate, a tiny lifeline to record the unrecordable. She flipped a page and wrote, "Unseen eyes, invisible signals, ordinary life fractured." The words made her shiver. Every instinct told her she was witnessing something rare, something historic, yet she was powerless to influence it. Her thoughts raced to her family. Should she call? Would they understand? The phone felt heavy in her hand. She hesitated, then slid it back into her pocket. The situation was delicate. Any misstep could escalate the already tense operation. A military escort in the sky was not an ordinary circumstance. She understood instinctively that the people orchestrating this were not focused on her comfort. They were focused on safety, security, and potentially national consequences beyond her comprehension. Claire's gaze wandered back to the jets. They moved like synchronized dancers, each shift deliberate, precise, intimidating. She could see the pilot's focus mirrored in the soldiers operating them, every movement choreographed with uncanny efficiency. Time seemed to slow. The hum of engines, the faint vibration through the cabin, the almost imperceptible tension in passengers' shoulders, it all combined into a singular, surreal experience. Claire's notebook felt like the only tether to normalcy, though even that seemed fragile. A soft tap on her shoulder jolted her. She looked up into the calm, serious eyes of an intelligence officer. "Ma'am, we need to speak with you," he said quietly, gesturing toward first class. Claire's stomach dropped. Her notebook fell from her lap, landing with a thump that seemed louder than it should have been. Her heart raced. Questions flooded her mind. Why her? How could this be happening? What had she done? And yet, she sensed instinctively that resistance would not help. As she followed the officer, moving past curious passengers whose whispers were swallowed by the hum of the plane, Claire felt an odd combination of fear, disbelief, and reluctant awe. She had always imagined adventurous travel mishaps, unexpected detours, but nothing like this. This was a collision of ordinary life and extraordinary circumstance. She was a tourist, yes, but one whose presence now dictated the movements of fighter jets and the attention of high-ranking security officials. She reached the first-class cabin, where a seat had been cleared for her. The intelligence officer gestured toward it. "Please sit. We'll explain as much as we can." Claire obeyed, her hands trembling slightly as she lowered herself into the plush seat. From here, She could see the cockpit door, the tiny blinking lights, the controlled chaos of a plane operating under strict, unusual protocols. The world outside had become alien, and inside, she was acutely aware that she was central to a story she did not yet understand. The minutes that followed were a blur of explanation and observation. Claire learned the pilots were maintaining communication with Air Force One, that her seat number 22C was linked to a rarely triggered security protocol, and that the alerts she had accidentally opened had somehow intersected with classified communications. She tried to wrap her mind around it, but the complexity was staggering. One moment, she was a tourist with sightseeing plans. The next, she was at the center of a real-time security operation involving multiple branches of the military. Claire's hands shook as she wrote in her notebook, recording what she could, attempting to impose order on the chaos. She noted the jets, the formation, the subtle signals, the intercom announcements, the reactions of other passengers. She noted her own fear, disbelief, and awe. Each word was a lifeline, a small anchor in a sky that had become unpredictable and extraordinary. She had no idea how long this would last, what decisions were being made on her behalf, or what might happen when the plane finally landed. And as she sat in 22C, surrounded by an orchestrated tension she could not fully comprehend, Claire understood something fundamental. Her ordinary life had collided with an extraordinary world. The simple act of opening a message, the choice of a seat, the curiosity that had always defined her, these had propelled her into an experience she would never forget. Above the clouds, flanked by fighter jets, escorted by Air Force One, she was no longer just a tourist. She was the eye of an unfolding, astonishing storm. Claire's pulse quickened as the plane settled into cruising altitude. The cabin, which had moments before felt ordinary and routine, now buzzed with an undercurrent of tension she couldn't ignore. Flight attendants moved with unusual precision, whispering into their headsets, exchanging brief, anxious glances. Each step they took seemed purposeful, calculated, almost like part of a choreography she didn't understand. Claire adjusted her seatbelt instinctively, as if it could somehow anchor her to the mundane world she had so recently left behind. She pulled her phone from her backpack, hoping for a distraction, but the device had other plans. Notifications blinked insistently on the screen. Emails marked urgent, encrypted messages that made no sense, and an alert from her banking app signaling a transfer she never initiated. She stared perplexed, feeling the first prickling wave of anxiety. How could her ordinary tourist account be connected to this? Her thumb hesitated over the screen, unsure if opening another message might worsen the inexplicable situation. Claire's gaze flicked to the cockpit door, where a brief shadow passed. The pilots' movements seemed more deliberate than usual, their heads turning in subtle communication with each other. She felt the almost imperceptible vibrations through the floor and seat, a rhythm that pulsed beneath her, as though the plane itself carried knowledge she could not access. A hum of mechanical energy became almost suffocating, blending with the low murmur of whispered instructions from the flight crew. Something had shifted, and the ordinary world Claire knew had disappeared somewhere behind the clouds. Then the intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. For reasons beyond our control, our flight is under military escort," the calm professional voice announced. Claire froze, her hand gripping the notebook in her lap. Escort? The word reverberated. In her mind, conjuring images of convoys, armed guards, and national emergencies. She forced herself to swallow hard, trying to remain composed, but the hum in her chest told a different story. She wasn't just on a plane, she was part of an operation she didn't understand. Claire's window revealed the unmistakable silhouettes of fighter jets, flanking the plane in perfect formation. They moved with a precision that left her breathless. Every twist and turn was calculated, a coordinated ballet of speed and steel slicing through clouds. One jet glinted in the sunlight as it adjusted position, engines roaring with controlled power. Claire could barely comprehend the scale of what she was witnessing. She pressed her notebook against her chest, writing frantic notes in tiny, cramped letters. Jets, formation, escort. What did I do? A soft tap on her shoulder startled her. She turned to see a woman in a sharply pressed uniform, the insignia of a federal agency glinting faintly on her lapel. "Ma'am, we need to speak with you in first class," the woman said quietly. Claire nodded, her throat tight. Her curiosity had always been her compass, but now she wondered if it might have led her into danger. She followed the officer, weaving past passengers who murmured and glanced toward the cockpit, sensing the tension without fully understanding it. As she reached first class, another figure greeted her, a man in a plain suit, exuding authority without aggression. He gestured toward a seat cleared for her, and Claire sat cautiously, hands trembling slightly. "We're going to explain as much as we can," he said, voice calm but weighted with significance. Claire nodded, trying to process the surreal sequence of events. She had boarded a simple domestic flight hours ago, and now she found herself surrounded by a security apparatus she barely understood. The man leaned in, lowering his voice. "Miss, your seat number, 22C, corresponds with a rarely activated security protocol. A digital signature associated with your account triggered a response. At this time, we are maintaining an escort for your safety and national security." Claire's stomach dropped. She blinked, trying to reconcile her ordinary life with the extraordinary circumstances surrounding her. She had no idea how a tourist could suddenly be at the center of a military operation. Her mind raced. Was this a mistake? She had clicked on an email earlier, an ordinary curiosity, nothing more. Yet somehow, that single act had intersected with classified communications. The fighter jets, the coordination, Air Force One above them, all of it now made a kind of impossible sense. She scribbled notes furiously, trying to impose order on a situation that defied logic. Clicked email. Triggered alert. Flight escorted. Am I being accused? Through the cabin window, the jets glided in formation. Their engines emitted a low, ominous hum, precise and unyielding. Claire felt the vibrations in her seat, the subtle pull of momentum and control. Time stretched and compressed. Each moment felt infinite, yet fleeting. She noticed passengers stealing glances at the sky, some whispering, others silently frozen in awe. The plane had become a suspended world, where every second carried weight, every glance hinted at danger, and every decision by the pilots and military personnel could ripple into consequences she could not predict. The intelligence officer seated beside her handed her a tablet. It displayed the messages and alerts that had triggered the response. Lines of code, numbers, and symbols that made no sense to her were highlighted in red. Claire stared at it, realizing she had inadvertently intersected with a communication network meant for government operations. Her pulse quickened. She had done nothing intentionally, yet the gravity of her presence was undeniable. One misstep could escalate the situation. She felt simultaneously terrified and mesmerized. Minutes dragged, each one a meticulous ballet of control and tension. Pilots maintained altitude, speed, and formation with the precision of surgeons performing delicate surgery. Flight attendants moved discreetly through the cabin, attending to passengers without revealing the seriousness of the situation. Claire scribbled more notes, describing every detail she could see. The glint of sunlight off a jet's wing, the coded communication over headsets, the subtle tension in passengers' postures. She could not stop writing, each word anchoring her to reality as it fractured around her. The captain's voice came over the intercom again, calm yet firm. "Passengers, please remain seated. Your safety is our highest priority." We ask that you refrain from using electronic devices near the cockpit. Further instructions will follow. Claire's stomach twisted. She tried to make sense of the instructions, but the words felt distant, almost symbolic. She realized the ordinary rules of a flight no longer applied. The cabin was a microcosm of controlled chaos, with her at its unknowing epicenter. Her thoughts drifted to her family back home. Should she call them? Would they understand the gravity of what was happening? The intelligence officer gently shook her arm, reminding her that communication would need to be coordinated. Claire nodded, understanding the delicate balance. Her personal curiosity had inadvertently collided with national security protocols. She felt a strange mix of guilt and awe. Her actions were innocent, yet the consequences were profound, visible in the jets outside and the tension surrounding her. The plane tilted slightly, signaling a course adjustment. Claire glimpsed the horizon through the window, clouds stretching endlessly, vast and indifferent. She was acutely aware that while the sky looked calm, beneath it, unseen systems were in motion. Radar, fighter jets, Air Force One above, and government officials monitoring her flight. The ordinary world she had known, a tourist adventure, sightseeing plans, quiet notes in her journal, was now suspended in a web of strategy and vigilance. She realized that her life had intersected with something larger than herself. Claire's notebook became a lifeline. She recorded every detail she could observe: the jet formations, pilots' movements, flight attendants' gestures, the coded alerts flashing on the tablet. Each entry was a way to impose order on chaos, a method to understand the incomprehensible. Her fingers ached from writing. Her mind buzzed with possibilities and fears, yet she continued. She knew, instinctively, that this moment would define her for the rest of her life. Hours or maybe minutes, time had warped past. The escort continued, unwavering, each jet precisely aligned, a silent testament to power and vigilance. Claire's mind wrestled with disbelief and awe. How had she, a simple tourist, become entangled in a chain of events that spanned airspace, technology, and national security? She felt both insignificant and pivotal simultaneously, a paradox that left her mind spinning. She pressed her notebook to her chest, feeling the weight of history pressing in, invisible yet undeniable. And as the plane maintained its formation, flanked by jets and watched by Air Force One above, Claire understood a simple truth. She was no longer merely a passenger. The ordinary had given way to the extraordinary. Curiosity had triggered action she could never have imagined, and the world above the clouds had shifted around her in ways she would carry forever. Claire sat in the first-class seat, her fingers still trembling as she stared at the tablet the officer had handed her. Lines of code, encrypted messages, and alerts scrolled in patterns that made no sense to her, but clearly they meant something monumental. Her heart pounded with a mix of fear and awe. How could she, a simple tourist, have triggered something so complex? She couldn't fathom the scale of what had happened, yet she knew it involved more than just a mistaken email or a misrouted notification. The intelligence officer beside her, a composed woman in a crisp navy blazer, spoke softly but firmly. "Miss Claire, we understand this is confusing, but you are at the center of a high-priority security protocol. Your seat number, 22C, corresponds to what we call a designated extraction point. Under extremely rare circumstances, this seat, combined with certain digital triggers, can escalate a flight to a heightened security status. That status includes escort by military jets and coordination with Air Force One." Claire blinked, unable to form words. Her mind spun, trying to reconcile her ordinary life with the extraordinary reality surrounding her. "But I'm just a tourist," she stammered. "I didn't do anything. I was just traveling, sightseeing, taking notes. I opened an email by accident." Her voice wavered. The phrase sounded insignificant, even ludicrous, in the sterile, high-stakes environment of first class. The officer nodded, her expression calm but serious. We know. That is precisely the issue. The system detected a digital anomaly that matched a classified operation, and your presence in C22C coincided with it. In the eyes of our monitoring systems, you became the central point of a potential threat, not because of intent, but because of coincidence. Protocols do not differentiate innocence from error when signals match certain criteria. Claire's stomach sank. She was overwhelmed, stunned by the sheer scale of what she had inadvertently triggered. Every detail in the cabin suddenly took on new significance. The pilot's clipped communication, the flight attendant's whispered instructions, the fighter jets in formation outside her window. None of it was random. She had walked, unknowingly, into a sequence of events designed to respond to the rarest contingencies in national security. Miss Claire, the officer continued, leaning slightly closer, we are not accusing you of wrongdoing. But until we can verify your identity, intentions, and actions, precautionary measures must remain in place. That includes the escort, the flight's modified course, and communication with Air Force One. You are safe, but we need to ensure there is no risk of interference with classified communications or operations. Claire pressed her hands against her forehead, trying to calm the surge of panic. Her mind raced. I'm a tourist. How did a vacation turn into this? The words echoed in her head like a mantra, both frightening and surreal. She thought of her parents, her friends back home, her carefully planned sightseeing itinerary, all suspended mid-air, overshadowed by a sequence of protocols she barely understood. She felt simultaneously invisible and central, a paradox that left her reeling. Can you show me what triggered it? Claire asked cautiously, nodding toward the tablet. The officer hesitated, then scrolled through highlighted sections. Red flags blinked across the screen. A digital signature, a misrouted communication, and a line of code associated with a classified network. Claire's eyes widened. The system had mistaken her email access for an unauthorized attempt to intercept sensitive information. In other words, she had done nothing wrong, but the coincidence had made her appear as a high-priority security concern. And what happens now? Claire asked, voice barely above a whisper. Do they think I'm dangerous? The officer's expression softened slightly. Dangerous? No, but the protocols do not assume innocence. They assume caution. That is why the escort remains, why Air Force One is aware, and why fighter jets flank this aircraft. We are here to ensure your safety and the integrity of ongoing operations, nothing more. Claire exhaled shakily. She had read about security protocols, contingency plans, and emergency extractions, but never imagined being part of one. The surreal reality of it settled in like a weight pressing down on her chest. She looked out the window again, noting the disciplined precision of the jets, the faint glint of Air Force One above, a silent sentinel in the sky. What had begun as a simple flight had transformed into a carefully orchestrated ballet of national security. The pilot's voice came over the intercom again, steady and professional. Passengers, we are continuing under a security protocol. Please remain seated. There is no danger to you. We appreciate your cooperation. Claire listened, noting the calm authority in the words. Everything had been designed to maintain composure and prevent panic. Yet the reality was impossible to ignore. She, an ordinary tourist, had been elevated to a status that required Air Force intervention. Her notebook became her anchor. She scribbled furiously, recording every detail, the alerts on her phone, the encrypted messages, the calm yet tense communication from the officers, the precision of the jets outside. Writing allowed her to impose order on chaos, a small sense of control in a situation dominated by forces far beyond her understanding. She noted every glance, every subtle shift in expression, every sound in the cabin, the low hum of engines, the occasional murmur of passengers, the faint vibration through the floor. Hours or maybe minutes. Time seemed distorted past in a surreal rhythm. Claire's notebook was filled with observations, questions, and partial explanations. The realization settled in gradually. She had done nothing intentionally, yet her actions had set a chain reaction in motion. One email, one curiosity-driven click, and she was now embedded in a protocol designed for contingencies she couldn't even begin to imagine. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating. The officer beside her finally broke the silence. "Miss Claire, once we verify your identity and confirm there is no threat, the escort will be lifted and you will continue your journey safely. For now, all we ask is your cooperation and patience. You are not in danger, but every precaution must remain in place." Claire nodded, swallowing hard. She understood, in a visceral way, that the extraordinary measures surrounding her were not punitive, they were protective. As the plane maintained altitude, flanked by fighter jets and monitored by Air Force One, Claire reflected on the strangeness of fate. How fragile ordinary life seemed, how easily it could intersect with extraordinary circumstances. A simple tourist decision opening an email, sitting in a particular seat, had propelled her into a high-stakes world of military precision and national security. She felt small, yet pivotal, invisible, yet central, like a single note in a symphony she could hear but not control. She glanced at her fellow passengers, some oblivious, some wide-eyed with curiosity or fear. Nobody fully understood the situation, yet the air seemed thick with shared tension. Claire realized that history could unfold in moments like these. Moments invisible to the world, yet monumental to those experiencing them. She pressed her notebook to her chest, capturing every detail, knowing she would carry this account forever. By the time the pilot announced a minor course adjustment to accommodate the escort, Claire felt a strange mixture of relief and anticipation. The reality of her situation had begun to solidify. She was no longer merely a tourist. She had entered a narrative far beyond ordinary life, a story that would become impossible to forget. And somewhere above the clouds, in a carefully orchestrated sky, the engines of military jets hummed a reminder of the delicate balance between curiosity and consequence, between the ordinary and the extraordinary. Claire's hands trembled as she pressed her notebook into her lap, trying to anchor herself in the surreal reality that had overtaken her flight. Outside, the fighter jets moved with flawless precision, slicing through clouds like synchronized shadows. Each subtle shift of their wings, each adjustment in formation, carried a silent message she could not decode, but instinctively she knew it was serious. Air Force One loomed faintly above the horizon, an imposing presence she could barely glimpse through the thick layer of clouds. The hum of engines reverberated through the cabin, vibrating through the floor and into Claire's chest. It was a constant, low reminder that the ordinary had vanished. Flight attendants moved quietly, speaking in clipped tones into headsets, exchanging rapid, hushed instructions. Claire's notebook had become her lifeline, filled with observations. The positions of the jets, the subtle gestures of the cockpit crew, the shifting expressions of other passengers. Every detail mattered. Every moment was fraught with tension she could neither explain nor escape. Her mind raced. How had a routine flight spiraled into a military operation? One email, one accidental click, one curious glance. And suddenly, she was at the center of something she barely understood. The intelligence officer seated beside her monitored her reactions carefully, speaking only when necessary. Miss Claire remained calm. The pilots and the escort are performing standard protocol for your safety. Any sudden movements could complicate communications, or cause unnecessary alerts. Claire nodded, swallowing hard. She tried to steady her breathing, focusing on the rhythmic vibrations beneath her feet. She glanced around the cabin. Passengers were tense, but unaware of the full scope of events. Some whispered anxiously, others stared out the windows at the jets glinting in the sunlight. The scale of the escort became increasingly apparent. These were not mere commercial aircraft adjustments. They were a coordinated, precise military-level operation, and she was at its heart. The pilot's voice came over the intercom again, steady and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are maintaining a heightened security protocol for this flight. Please remain seated and calm. All necessary measures are in place for your safety." Claire tried to focus on the calm authority in his words, but the knowledge that Air Force One was now directly involved made the instructions feel almost surreal. Her ordinary life had been replaced with an extraordinary skyborne theater of security, precision, and high stakes. Minutes dragged, each one stretching endlessly, yet simultaneously passing in the blink of an eye. Claire's notebook was filled with frantic notes, sketches, and observations, but even that could not capture the full magnitude of the events outside her window. Fighter jets adjusted positions with meticulous care, communicating silently through subtle signals. Claire's eyes followed every movement, every change in formation, her pulse quickening with each shift. She scribbled furiously. Jets, formation, Air Force One, heightened alert, something extraordinary unfolding. The intelligence officer leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Miss Claire, the escort exists not because of any threat posed by you personally, but because the anomaly triggered by your presence in Seat 22C matches criteria in our security protocol. This is highly unusual, rare, and entirely precautionary. Your cooperation allows us to manage the situation safely." Claire nodded, her mind spinning. Cooperation was simple enough, but understanding, comprehending, or believing was almost impossible. Her gaze returned to the window. Clouds stretched endlessly below, a thick, soft carpet masking the ground she had left behind. The city skyline was now a distant memory, replaced with a sky filled with disciplined precision, military coordination, and the quiet hum of engines. The ordinary flight she had expected was gone. Each glance outside reminded her that her every movement, however innocent, was now magnified within a system that balanced caution, communication, and national security. She tried to calm herself, focusing on the notebook, writing down every detail, every observation. The hum of engines, the subtle vibration beneath her feet, the coordinated movements of the escorting jets. Everything became data she could record, as though documenting it might somehow make it comprehensible. She noted the patterns of communication, the flickers of light on control panels, a tension in the flight attendants' shoulders. Each observation was a tiny anchor in a world that felt increasingly untethered. Time seemed distorted. The plane maintained altitude, speed, and heading with meticulous care, while jets flanked them on all sides. Every adjustment in formation, every subtle tilt of a wing, carried a message Claire could not interpret. She felt both insignificant and hypervisible, a paradox that weighed heavily on her chest. She scribbled, trying to reconcile the ordinary with the extraordinary. I am just a tourist. And yet, everything has changed. A passenger near the window whispered nervously, "Why is this happening?" Claire shook her head slightly, unable to provide an answer. She did not know herself. She could only observe, record, and follow instructions. Each movement she made felt amplified by the stakes surrounding her. The ordinary, mundane actions she had taken before boarding, choosing a seat, opening an email, had somehow intersected with an extraordinary, high-security operation that she could neither control nor fully understand. The officer beside her continued, monitoring the situation. The pilots are maintaining formation and altitude, precisely to avoid any misunderstandings with other air traffic. Fighter jets are here to ensure safe passage, and Air Force One is providing oversight. Your presence in Seat 22C triggered an anomaly that, while innocent, required this response. We ask for your continued patience. Claire nodded again, pressing her notebook tightly. She felt her pulse in her fingertips, her heart beating faster with each minute. Claire's eyes wandered to the cockpit. She could see the faint glow of screens and instruments, the subtle movements of the pilots' hands as they communicated with both the escort and the control center. The precise choreography was mesmerizing and intimidating. She realized she had become part of a living, breathing network of control, communication, and coordination, all unfolding in real time above clouds she could not name. Each second carried weight, and every decision had consequences she could not predict. She looked around at the passengers. Some were oblivious, lost in their devices or conversations. Others whispered wide-eyed with curiosity or fear. Claire felt a sense of responsibility, not because she had caused this, but because she was central to it. She pressed her notebook to her chest, capturing every detail she could, knowing that once this was over, these observations would form the only bridge between her ordinary life and the extraordinary experience she had lived. Hours or maybe minutes, it was impossible to measure past. Claire remained seated, notebook open, recording the hum of engines, the subtle vibrations, the disciplined formation of the escorting jets. Air Force One remained above them, an ever-present sentinel. She realized that the extraordinary had replaced the ordinary completely. Every glance out the window reminded her of the precise orchestration happening beyond her comprehension. She was simultaneously insignificant and crucial, invisible yet central, a passenger who had inadvertently become the linchpin in a national security ballet. Finally, the captain's voice returned over the intercom, calm but firm. Passengers, we are continuing under heightened security. Please remain seated. Your safety is our highest priority. Claire nodded, taking a deep breath. She understood, in a visceral way, that her ordinary life had collided with extraordinary forces. She was no longer just a tourist in 22C. She had become part of something monumental, a story unfolding above the clouds, flanked by jets and observed by the most powerful aircraft in the nation. And as she pressed her notebook tightly against her chest, writing down the endless details of formation, protocol, and observation, Claire understood one truth. The ordinary could vanish in an instant, replaced by the extraordinary. Her curiosity, her inadvertent click, her presence in Seat 22C had created a cascade of events she would never forget. And above the clouds, surrounded by precision, power, and protection, Claire realized that her life had changed forever. Claire's stomach churned as the captain's voice came over the intercom again, calm but firm. Ladies and gentlemen, we are evaluating a potential emergency landing at a secure location. Please remain seated and calm. The words sent a jolt through her chest. Emergency landing? Her mind raced, imagining her plans to visit the Smithsonian, the Lincoln Memorial, the carefully plotted itinerary she had made for weeks. None of that mattered anymore. She was no longer a tourist. In 22C, she was part of a highly sensitive national security operation unfolding above the clouds. The fighter jets maintained their formation, glinting in the sunlight as they flanked the aircraft on both sides. Their engines roared, a constant reminder that Claire was not in ordinary airspace anymore. Each jet communicated in precise, silent signals, adjustments made with the skill of trained professionals. Air Force One remained above, an imposing presence that seemed to dominate the sky. The scale of the operation was staggering, almost impossible to comprehend, and Claire could feel the weight of every decision being made, decisions that affected her safety, the security of the flight, and potentially national interests. Intelligence officer beside her leaned in, voice low but deliberate. "Miss Claire, we are coordinating with ground officials about a possible diversion. Options include immediate landing at a secure airfield or maintaining our current trajectory, under escort until further instructions. These measures are purely precautionary, but the situation requires strict adherence to protocol." Claire swallowed hard, her hands trembling slightly. The idea of a secure airfield, of being surrounded by officials she could barely recognize, sent a new wave of anxiety through her. "Why? Why me?" Claire whispered, almost to herself. "I didn't do anything wrong." The officer's expression softened, though her voice remained professional. "You triggered an anomaly, a rare intersection between a civilian presence and a security protocol. Your intentions do not matter. The system reacts to the anomaly itself. That is why we maintain the escort, and why officials are preparing contingency plans. You are safe, but the risk, however minor, cannot be ignored." Claire pressed her notebook tightly to her chest, feeling the paper crinkle slightly. Her thoughts spun. One accidental email, one innocent click, and she was now at the center of a carefully orchestrated security operation, facing possibilities she had never imagined. She looked out the window again. The clouds stretched endlessly beneath. Her, beautiful and indifferent, a stark contrast to the tension inside the cabin. She wondered what it would be like to touch down at a secure airfield, surrounded by officials and personnel, under the watchful eye of Air Force One. The cabin was unusually quiet. Passengers had begun to notice something was different, though. None could grasp the full reality. A few whispered nervously, glancing toward the cockpit, while others clutched armrests or fiddled with devices in anxious distraction. Claire's presence in first class, under the close watch of the intelligence officer, set her apart. She realized that she was not only the focus of military attention, but also a point of curiosity for those around her. Every glance felt like a reminder that nothing about this flight was ordinary. Minutes passed as the captain, in communication with Air Force One and ground officials, weighed options. Claire could feel the tension in every movement of the crew, in every subtle adjustment of the jets outside. Every signal, every change in formation, seemed significant. The plane tilted slightly as a jet adjusted its position, and Claire noted the almost imperceptible shifts in altitude and angle. She wrote furiously in her notebook, documenting every observation. Her handwriting was messy, but each word was a lifeline, a record of a situation she could barely process in real time. The intelligence officer beside her spoke again. "Miss Claire, we are considering diverting to a secure facility where you can be debriefed and cleared. This is a precaution, not a punitive measure. Once the investigation confirms no threat exists, the escort will be lifted and your travel plans can resume. Until then, all protocols remain in place." Claire nodded, swallowing hard. She felt trapped, yet strangely exhilarated. Her ordinary life had vanished, replaced by an unprecedented brush with national security. As the plane maintained altitude, the pilot's calm voice cut through the tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are proceeding under precautionary measures. Please continue to remain seated. All systems are functioning normally, and your safety is our primary concern." Claire exhaled slowly, trying to anchor herself with the familiar routine of seatbelt clicks, soft hums, and subtle vibrations beneath her feet. But even as she tried to focus on the ordinary, the extraordinary enveloped every detail: the jets, the coordinated adjustments, the presence of Air Force One above. The officer beside her spoke again, softer this time. "Miss Claire, we understand the stress this may cause, but your cooperation is vital. The faster we can confirm your status, the sooner you will be cleared. We appreciate your calm and adherence." To protocol. Claire nodded, scribbling notes, her mind racing with questions. How had a simple seat, a single click, and her curiosity combined to create this chain reaction? She felt a mix of awe, fear, and disbelief, realizing she had become part of a story she could never have imagined. As the plane maintained its course, communication with ground officials intensified. Air traffic around them was rerouted, other flights diverted to prevent confusion or interference. Claire could feel the gravity of the situation in every subtle vibration and every hum of the engines. The escorting jets moved with perfect coordination, signals passing silently between them and the plane. The precision was breathtaking, but also intimidating. Every movement outside reminded Claire of the stakes she did not fully understand, but could not ignore. She glanced around the cabin. Passengers shifted nervously, some whispering, others staring out the windows at the jets. And the sky. Claire realized how alone she felt in her extraordinary position. She was at the center of a storm invisible to the public, and yet every decision, every adjustment affected her. She pressed her notebook to her chest, recording every detail, the angle of a wing, the flicker of a light, the tone of the pilot's intercom announcements. Each entry was an attempt to understand a world that defied ordinary logic. The officer beside her reached for a small device, showing Claire a visual representation of the flight path. We are monitoring your location, altitude, and digital presence. Every precautionary measure is in place to prevent escalation. Once verified, you will be escorted safely to a secure facility, debriefed and cleared. Claire nodded, swallowing hard. The reality was overwhelming. Her ordinary life had collided with extraordinary protocols, and she had no choice but to trust the people guiding her through it. Minutes stretched again, each second amplified by anticipation. Claire's pulse raced as she realized the full scope of the operation. Fighter jets, Air Force One, ground coordination, all moving in perfect synchrony to manage a situation she had inadvertently caused. Every subtle adjustment, every precise signal, reminded her of the scale and importance of what was unfolding. She was powerless, yet central, invisible, yet pivotal. She pressed her notebook to her chest, capturing every detail of this surreal, high-altitude drama. Finally, the captain spoke again, voice calm but firm. Passengers, we are preparing for a precautionary diversion. Your safety is ensured, and all procedures are being followed meticulously. Please remain seated and calm. Claire exhaled, feeling the tension in her chest slowly ease, though the surreal reality remained. She understood that the extraordinary measures surrounding her were protective, necessary, and beyond ordinary comprehension. Her travel plans were on hold, her ordinary life suspended, and yet she felt a strange exhilaration in being at the heart of a story she could barely imagine. Claire's stomach twisted as the pilot's voice filled the cabin again, steady and calm, but impossible to ignore. Ladies and gentlemen, we are initiating a precautionary diversion to a secure facility. All passengers are to remain seated, with seatbelts fastened. Crew members will provide instructions as necessary. The words hung heavy in the air, replacing the ordinary hum of a commercial flight with a sense of inescapable gravity. Claire pressed her notebook to her chest, scribbling the announcement in tiny, cramped letters. Every word mattered. Every detail felt like history unfolding around her. Outside, the fighter jets flanked the plane with the same meticulous precision, their engines roaring in coordinated rhythm. Claire's gaze followed every movement, the glint of sunlight reflecting off wings, the subtle signals exchanged between pilots. Air Force One hovered above, a looming sentinel in the vast blue sky. The ordinary world had vanished entirely. Her journey to see the city, to wander museums, to experience the history she had studied from afar, had been replaced with a theater. of national security, a ballet of machinery, and personnel orchestrated to protect her, whether she wanted it or not. The intelligence officer beside her leaned in, voice low and steady. "Miss Claire, upon landing, you will be escorted to a secure area for verification and debriefing. Your cooperation is vital. The procedure is precautionary, but necessary." Claire nodded, her pulse quickening. She felt simultaneously safe and powerless. Every movement she made, every breath she took, was now contained within a framework she could not influence, bound by rules she did not fully understand. The plane descended, the ground slowly emerging through gaps in the cloud. Cover. Claire could see sprawling tarmacs, long rows of hangars, and distant towers she had never visited. The scale of the facility was imposing, far larger and more fortified than any airport she had ever flown into. The fighter jets adjusted their positions as the plane approached, flanking her craft in a precise arc while Air Force One hovered. At a safe altitude above, she felt the vibrations of landing gear extending, the subtle shudder as the plane prepared to touch down. A hush fell over the cabin. Passengers glanced out the windows, whispering anxiously. Claire noticed the tension in their shoulders, the way hands gripped armrests or clutched devices. Her own hands shook slightly as she held her notebook. Every detail mattered now. The position of the jets, the angle of descent, the brief adjustments of the pilot's hands on the controls. She scribbled furiously, recording observations she knew would never be believed outside the pages of her notebook. The plane touched down with a controlled precision that belied the tension in the cabin. Tires squealed softly against the runway, a mechanical whisper compared to the roar of jets flanking them. Claire's stomach tightened, adrenaline mingling with fear and relief. She realized, with startling clarity, that every passenger on board was part of an unfolding story they barely understood, yet which now encompassed her in ways she could not escape. She felt hypervisible, fragile, and central, all at once. The intelligence officer leaned in, her voice almost soothing. "Stay seated. Keep your seatbelt fastened until we give clearance. Crew and ground personnel will guide the process." Claire nodded, though her hands shook as she clutched her notebook. She tried to steady her breathing, focusing on the small, tangible details. The hum of engines, the vibration beneath her feet, the faint clinking of harnesses being secured by flight attendants. The ordinary rules of air travel no longer applied. She was navigating a world that balanced extreme caution with national security, and every moment carried weight. As the plane taxied to a secure hangar, the escorting jets slowly pulled away, maintaining a protective perimeter as communications with ground personnel intensified. Claire peered out the window, marveling at the scale of the operation. The hangar doors were enormous, reinforced and guarded by personnel in uniforms she did not recognize. Vehicles with flashing lights moved with precision, and the atmosphere felt simultaneously organized and tense. She realized she had never been part of anything remotely like this. The plane finally came to a halt inside the secure area. Engines hummed softly, and Claire felt the subtle shift as the aircraft settled on the tarmac. Flight attendants began, instructing passengers to remain seated, explaining in clipped tones that authorities would escort them individually. Claire's heart pounded. She had imagined travel delays, lost luggage, and missed connections, but never this. The thought of being led away under the watchful eye of military personnel made her stomach twist. The officer beside her gently tapped her arm. "Miss Claire, we are coming to verify your identity. Follow my instructions exactly." Claire nodded, feeling a mixture of fear, curiosity, and awe. She gathered her notebook, her bag, and followed the officer as the first-class aisle emptied, passengers directed toward temporary holding areas under guard. Every step felt heavy, surreal. the ordinary world she had left behind, her plans, her sightseeing itinerary, her casual enthusiasm, was suspended in an invisible yet inescapable narrative of extraordinary consequence. Outside the plane, the air smelled faintly of fuel and ozone. Ground personnel in uniforms guided the operation with remarkable precision. Claire's heart raced as she walked toward a waiting vehicle, escorted by officers who communicated silently, through subtle gestures and radios. She felt the weight of being both observed and protected, central to an event she could neither influence nor fully understand. Every glance, every footstep, every whispered command reinforced the extraordinary nature of her predicament. Once inside the secure area, Claire was led to a small room, sparsely furnished but functional, equipped with a table, chairs, and a single monitor displaying flight data and security status. The officer motioned for her to sit. "Miss Claire, this will take some time. We need to verify your identity, review the sequence of events, and ensure that there is no risk. Please remain calm. Everything we are doing is precautionary and for your safety." Claire nodded, her fingers clutching the notebook like a lifeline. She sat, notebook open, writing rapidly. Every observation mattered: the controlled landing, the precise movements of ground personnel, the scale of the hangar, the coordination of escorting jets. She scribbled details of the plane, the airspace, the communication between the cockpit and Air Force One, the surreal reality of her situation, the way her ordinary actions had intersected with extraordinary protocols, pressed down on her chest. She felt both small and pivotal, a tourist who had become the centerpiece of a high-stakes national security operation. Hours, or what felt like hours, passed as officials conducted their verification process. Claire answered questions carefully, explained her actions, and provided digital access to her devices for review. At each step, she felt the immense gravity of the situation. The ordinary life she had imagined was gone, replaced by scrutiny, protocols, and an invisible network of personnel orchestrating events beyond her comprehension. Yet she remained calm, recording every detail, every observation, every subtle interaction. Finally, after meticulous verification, the intelligence officer spoke. "Miss Claire, everything has been reviewed and cleared. There was no threat. You are free to continue your journey once we lift the remaining security measures." Relief washed over her, though tinged with lingering awe. She realized that her life had been forever altered. A simple email, a single seat, and her curiosity had propelled her into a narrative she would carry for the rest of her life. She stood, clutching her notebook, and stepped toward the vehicle, waiting to transport her from the secure hangar. Outside, the sky glowed with the warm light of late afternoon, clouds drifting lazily, indifferent to the extraordinary events unfolding below. Claire took a deep breath, feeling a strange combination of fear, exhilaration, and gratitude. The ordinary world was waiting, but she would never be the same. Claire followed the intelligence officer down a narrow corridor, the hum of secure communications and distant footsteps filling the air. Her heart raced with a mixture of relief and lingering tension. Just hours ago, she had been an ordinary tourist, planning her day around museums and city streets. Now she was walking through a fortified facility, the gravity of her situation settling heavily in her chest. Every door, every guarded corner, every discreet camera reminded her that she had entered a world far removed from ordinary life. The officer led her into a small, well-lit room, sparsely furnished but functional. A table, a few chairs, and a monitor displaying flight data and encrypted communication logs dominated the space. Claire noticed the quiet efficiency of the room. Everything had a purpose. Nothing was extraneous. She set her notebook on the table, opening it to the pages filled with her meticulous observations, sketches, and notes. Each entry was a lifeline, a way to preserve the extraordinary events she had witnessed in a world that seemed almost unreal. "Miss Clare," the officer began, her voice calm but authoritative, "you have triggered what is known as a level 5 security anomaly. This is extraordinarily rare, and your presence in seat 22C, coinciding with a digital anomaly, caused a chain reaction that escalated to the highest levels of national security. We need to review your actions, your devices, and your understanding of the events that led to this response." Claire swallowed hard, nodding. She had expected some questioning, some explanations, but the weight of the words left her momentarily speechless. Level 5 anomaly. She had no idea what that entailed, only that it sounded serious, critical, and unprecedented for a civilian like her. She opened her notebook again, fingers trembling slightly, ready to recount every observation, every detail, every small movement she had noted during the flight. The officer gestured toward a chair across from her. "Please sit. We will go step by step. Start with your actions before boarding the flight and any interactions with digital communication networks that might have triggered the anomaly." Claire took a deep breath. She explained her ordinary routine: planning the trip, booking the flight, opening a series of personal emails, and noting observations in her digital journal. She emphasized that nothing she had done was intentional or related to security protocols. The officer listened intently, occasionally nodding, occasionally typing on a secure device. Claire's hands shook slightly, but she pressed on, recounting her observations of the flight, the subtle shifts in the pilot's movements, the formation of the jets, the presence of Air Force One, and the precision with which the cabin crew carried out their instructions. She described every detail in vivid terms, hoping her notes would convey the extraordinary reality of her experience. "Your documentation is invaluable," the officer said, glancing at the notebook. "Even though this was an unintended trigger, your observations provide insights into operational response, coordination of air assets, and passenger management under high-security conditions. Your perspective as an observer is rare and will be analyzed for future protocol refinement." Claire's heart pounded. She had never imagined that her ordinary curiosity writing notes, observing, documenting could contribute to national security in such a direct way. Another officer entered the room, carrying a secure tablet. "Miss Claire, we need to examine your digital footprint. Please provide access to any devices used during your flight." Claire handed over her phone and tablet. She watched as the officers carefully reviewed her activity, confirming her account of events. Nothing malicious was found. Her actions were innocent, coincidental, yet they had intersected with highly sensitive communications in a way that triggered the anomaly. The lead officer continued, voice calm but deliberate. "What you experienced is extraordinarily rare. No one could have predicted a level 5 anomaly from a civilian action. Your timing, seat assignment, and digital interaction created a perfect storm, one that required full military coordination to ensure safety and maintain operational integrity." Claire nodded slowly. The weight of her accidental involvement settled over her. She had not caused harm, but she had become the center of a high-stakes, highly classified response that had enveloped her from takeoff to landing. Claire leaned back, taking a deep breath. "So, I wasn't in danger then?" she asked, her voice trembling. The officer shook her head gently. "You are never at personal risk. The response was precautionary, designed to protect you and maintain national security. The escort, the coordination with Air Force One, the secure landing all were measures to ensure safety and operational continuity. You were the focus of an extraordinary coincidence, not a threat." Relief washed over Claire, though tempered by lingering awe. She realized she had been part of something monumental, a story she could barely comprehend. Every observation, Every note, every sketch she had made became a piece of history, a record of an event that combined ordinary curiosity with extraordinary consequence. She pressed her notebook to her chest, grateful for the tangible anchor it provided in a world that had become almost surreal. The officer gestured toward the monitor, displaying a timeline of the flight, the anomaly detection, and the sequence of responses. Claire watched as the chain reaction unfolded in precise detail. The detection of her digital activity, the automated escalation protocol, the coordinated deployment of jets, and the communication with Air Force One. Every step was meticulously logged, every decision carefully considered. Claire could see how a single civilian action had intersected with layers of security she had never imagined existed. Miss Claire, the officer continued, this incident will be reviewed at multiple levels, and your observations will contribute to refining protocols for civilian interaction with secure communications. You have no obligation beyond cooperation, but your insight is unprecedented. Claire nodded, feeling a strange combination of pride and disbelief. She had never sought recognition. She had simply acted out of curiosity. Yet her ordinary curiosity had become part of something extraordinary, a story she would carry forever. As the debriefing concluded, Claire felt the tension in her chest slowly ease. She had survived a Level 5 anomaly, experienced a full military escort, and landed under strict supervision. Her notebook, filled with observations and insights, was now a testament to the extraordinary events that had unfolded. She realized that her life had changed in ways she could not have predicted. The ordinary world, the museums, the city streets, the casual notes in her journal had been suspended and transformed by forces she had never imagined. Finally, the officer spoke one last time. Miss Claire, you are cleared to resume your travel. You will be escorted to transportation and released to continue your journey safely. Remember, this event is classified, and discussion with unauthorized parties is prohibited. Thank you for your cooperation and detailed observations. Claire nodded, clutching her notebook, a tangible record of her extraordinary experience. As she was escorted toward the vehicle that would take her from the secure facility, Claire felt a mixture of relief, awe, and disbelief. She had started the day as a simple tourist, curious about her surroundings and eager to explore. By the end, she had become the centerpiece of a national security operation, a witness to the extraordinary coordination of airspace, military assets, and protocols, designed to protect lives and maintain order. She realized that her ordinary curiosity had propelled her into a story she could never have imagined. Outside, the sky glowed with the warm light of late afternoon. Claire took a deep breath, feeling the surreal weight of what she had experienced. The ordinary world waited, but she knew she would never see it in the same way again. Her life had intersected with forces far beyond her control, and she had survived, learned, and recorded every detail. She pressed her notebook to her chest. One last time, knowing that her journey as a tourist in 22C had transformed her forever. Claire stepped out of the secure facility, blinking against the bright afternoon sun. The sky stretched endlessly, clouds drifting lazily, a stark contrast to the controlled chaos she had left behind. Every instinct urged her to breathe freely, to let go of the adrenaline that had held her taut for hours, but the surreal weight of the day remained. She had started the morning as a simple tourist in Seat 22C. Now she had emerged from a world of classified operations, fighter jets, and Air Force One hovering above her flight. The intelligence officer walked beside her, calm and reassuring. Miss Claire, your cooperation was exemplary. You will be escorted to transportation, and after that, you may resume your travels. Remember, the events you witnessed are classified. Your observations, however, will help refine security protocols for future incidents. Claire nodded, clutching her notebook. The pages were filled with her frantic, meticulous notes, sketches of jet formations, observations of pilot and crew, coordination, and the hum of engines and vibrations through the aircraft. It was the story of her day, the only record of the extraordinary experience she had lived. As she was guided to a secure vehicle, she glanced back at the hangar. Fighter jets flanked the perimeter, engines idling like silent guardians. Air Force One lingered above, its presence a reminder of the scale of operations that had unfolded around her. Claire pressed her notebook to her chest, realizing that this day, ordinary in her intentions, but extraordinary in reality, had transformed her perspective forever. She was no longer just a tourist. She had been part of something monumental. During the ride back toward the city, Claire's mind replayed every detail of the flight and the debriefing. She remembered the precise choreography of the escorting jets, the calm but tense instructions of the flight attendants, the low hum of engines vibrating through the cabin, and the pilot's unwavering composure. She thought of Air Force One hovering silently above, a sentinel she had never imagined sharing airspace with. Each memory was vivid, impossible to erase, and yet impossible to fully comprehend. Her thoughts wandered to the passengers on the flight. Many of them had remained oblivious to the extraordinary event unfolding around them, unaware that the course of their travel had intersected with national security in ways they could not perceive. Claire felt a peculiar blend of isolation and connection. She had been at the center of it all, yet surrounded by witnesses who did not grasp the magnitude of what had occurred. Her notebook, her observations, were her only tether to understanding and sharing this surreal experience. As the vehicle drove through the city streets, Claire reflected on the series of coincidences that had led to the Level 5 anomaly. One accidental email, one innocuous click, one seat assignment in 22C, each seemingly ordinary choice had triggered an extraordinary sequence of events. She marveled at the precision of the security apparatus, the coordination of military jets, the involvement of Air Force One, and the meticulous care of officers who had ensured her safety throughout the ordeal. The ordinary had collided with the extraordinary in a perfect storm of timing, circumstance, and coincidence. Arriving at her hotel, Claire was allowed to disembark, escorted only briefly by security personnel. The ordinary world welcomed her, back with the familiar sights of taxis, pedestrians, and the distant hum of the city. Yet nothing felt ordinary anymore. Her perception of airspace, travel, and safety had shifted. She realized that the world above the clouds was organized, powerful, and attentive in ways she could scarcely imagine. Her curiosity, her accidental actions, had placed her at the nexus of that hidden universe. That evening, Claire sat in her hotel room, notebook open on the table. She reread every entry, every sketch, every note she had made during the flight. And debriefing. The details came alive. The subtle tilts of jet wings, the coordinated hum of engines, the disciplined gestures of the flight crew, the precise communication between aircraft. Each memory was now immortalized in her pages. She realized that while she could not share these events publicly, the notebook was her testament to the extraordinary day she had lived. Claire reflected on the emotional journey of the day. Fear, awe, relief, and exhilaration had intertwined, creating a tapestry of experience she could never have predicted. She realized that even though she had been a passive participant in the security response, her ordinary choices had made her central to an operation that spanned thousands of feet above the earth and involved some of the most powerful forces in the nation. She was no longer a passive tourist. She was a witness to a rare, almost mythical event. In the quiet moments, Claire allowed herself to imagine telling the story carefully, in coded terms, to avoid breaching confidentiality. She envisioned recounting the flight, the escort, the hum of engines, and the presence of Air Force One without revealing sensitive details. She imagined the awe of listeners, their disbelief, their fascination with a story so extraordinary it defied ordinary experience. Claire realized that her day in 22C had become a private legend, a narrative she would carry forever. As she closed her notebook for the final time, Claire reflected on the subtle lesson of the day. The ordinary could collide with the extraordinary at any moment, and curiosity, even accidental curiosity, could propel an ordinary individual into events of monumental significance. She thought of the precision, the discipline, and the careful orchestration of the military and intelligence personnel. She felt gratitude, awe, and a profound sense of humility. Her ordinary life had been forever transformed. That night, as Claire gazed out her hotel window at the city lights, she allowed herself a quiet smile. She remembered the moment when Air Force One had hovered above her flight, the escorting jets slicing through the sky, and the surreal realization that she had become the focus of one of the most meticulous security operations she could imagine. She was just a tourist in seat 22C, but in that brief, extraordinary intersection of time and circumstance, she had witnessed something that few in the world would ever experience. Claire leaned back in her chair, notebook beside her, reflecting on the day's improbable chain of events. Her ordinary curiosity had intersected with extraordinary protocols, and she had survived, observed, and recorded every moment. She realized that her life had changed forever, not because she sought adventure, but because the universe had decided to thrust her into a narrative that defied ordinary understanding. She had become both observer and participant in a story that would remain etched in memory. And as the city lights twinkled below, Claire made a silent promise. She would never forget the flight, the escort, or the hum of engines vibrating through the cabin. She would carry the story of 22C with her always, a private testament to the extraordinary that could emerge from the most ordinary of circumstances. In the sky above, the world continued, oblivious to the drama, yet she would forever know the moment when a simple tourist became the center of a nation's watchful gaze.